Hey everyone, it's Strange Michael. I hope you're doing well today. Of course, we're in the middle of the Christmas movie reviews right now. Not that this or many of the things I've talked about upcoming or will be talking about are typically Christmas movies. Some of them will just be horror films that take place during a snowy night or a wintry night, that kind of thing. I do have one particular film here that is one of my favorite films of all time. I think it's absolutely terrifying, one of the scariest movies and books ever written. And I think a lot of people have probably seen this. A lot of you folks have probably seen this if you're about my age, if not a little bit younger. But the younger folks who might be watching this channel who have crossed over from my Goosebumps channel to here probably don't know about this movie. This film is very well made. It's an adaptation. It's very fantastic, pretty much entirely faithful to that book, except for like one little part that I know about, maybe two, from my memory at least. But this is a movie that I saw over and over again growing up. My mom showed it to me very much like she did Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th on television, of course, so a lot of the more difficult parts of the film, I didn't see as much of those. But the film itself is truly terrifying. It's a horror film slash thriller, like I said, and there are elements to this that you don't really see as masterfully done as they were here. This film is a wonderful masterpiece of its time. It came out in 1990, and that film is Misery, starring James Cain and Kathy Bates. I'm a massive fan of both of these people. Of course, James Cain, a lot of you guys probably know from Elf. He played, Will Ferrell's dad, the long-lost father. Kathy Bates, you've seen in a bunch of stuff. Dolores Claiborne, another Stephen King adaptation, which, by the way, Misery is a Stephen King book. It's actually the first Stephen King book I ever read back in middle school. I didn't know that's what this was or who Stephen King was at that time, but I fell in love with his work. As much as I don't like the guy, I like his work a lot. Misery here. Kathy Bates, she's in The Stand for a very small cameo, but she's in so many movies, dude. She is a phenomenal actress. One of the best actresses of our entire generation these years, these recent years. It's kind of sad that you don't see her in as much nowadays because she's brilliant. She's genuinely brilliant. One of the best actresses to ever live, in my opinion. And this, to me, every time I think about this movie, as much as I love James Cain, who sadly passed away this year, I don't really think about him as much when I think about this movie. I think about Kathy Bates, even though both of them are the focus of this film. They're the main performances of the film, even though there is some other side characters kind of doing their own subplots. Most of this film is focused on those two and their relationship and what they're dealing with here. And it is a total performance-driven, character-driven movie, And most movies, people would agree, should be based around that. A lot of films either have a plot or a flimsy plot, and then have some characters that may or may not be any good in the midst of that. This film, almost entirely, with the plot, has a character-driven narrative, kind of like Drive, for example. And I love that about it. I think it's something that's kind of missing from a lot of thrillers. Some thrillers have that. One of the more recent ones was The Lodge, if you've seen that a few years back. But a lot of the time you don't really get that benefit. And I'll tell you right now, I think Misery, again, is one of the best horror films ever made. I think it's absolutely horrifically scary. The book is scary. It's pretty much faithful as an adaptation, like I said. But personally, I think this perfected what Stephen King really did as a masterpiece in his book. And being one of his very few short books out there, I think it's kind of surprising how well done that is compared to a lot of his work. It's probably my top 5 of his books of all time. But to see this movie adaptation be as good as it is and kind of improve certain moments is surprising. There's things I've never seen in a film done before or after this. As many movies as I've watched over my lifetime, especially with horrors and thrillers and all of that, you don't really see things done the way Misery does it. I almost called this Thriller, I don't know why. As in like Michael Jackson's Thriller. Anyway, Misery, what is this film about? Well, like I said, it came out in 1990. Basically, I have a man named Paul Sheldon who happens to be a writer of this series called Misery, about a woman named Misery. And he, essentially he's driving his book to, I guess, New York City or wherever to drop it off to his agent or publisher or whoever. And when he's going to transport it, he gets into a wreck when he's leaving the lodge he was staying at to write the book. And when he runs off the road in his Mustang, he crashes, he breaks both of his legs, and he's kind of just stuck. Well, somebody comes through named Annie Wilkes, who used to be a nurse, a practicing nurse. Apparently she's not anymore. We don't really know why. And you find out later on why. But Annie Wilkes rescues him, takes him back to her house, claims that the phones are down and that the hospitals are a little far away and that she couldn't safely transport him to the hospital. She decides to take him in, take care of him, and try to help him get back up to health. But she also happens to be his #1 fan. Yes, this is kind of a movie focused around fandom versus writers. But not really. It's more of just a straight-up like thriller aspect of Is she genuine or is she not? There might be some things about Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates, who's a little off. A little off. And let me tell you, the more that I watch this movie over the years, I watch it every few years. Every time I see it, there are people that I see around me as an adult, that I work with, that I see on the streets, friends of friends, you know, those kinds of things, that they just resemble Annie a little too much. Just a little too much. You just have to wonder about some people. It almost feels like in the age of Twitter and the age of Reddit, too many people have been turned into Annie Wilkes, or the Annie Wilkeses have gotten a louder voice in a lot of ways. It's kind of a little scary, you know? But with that being said, this movie's timeless. It's an absolute classic. The filmmaking aspect to it, everything, the acting, the music, all of it is so freaking good. And like I said, most of it, pretty much all of it, takes place during the winter time. So there's kind of that aspect here that I really think when I watch this film, it's not just about the atmosphere of the movie and everything else that's so compelling about it, or even the plot and how scary that is of being trapped with some cuckoo who happens to be your favorite fan, is upset about something you did in a recent book. All of that stuff is very frightening. All of that stuff is very effective. But the film for me is one of those films, like another Stephen King adaptation called Storm of the Century that he actually worked directly on, that truly to me, when I think about both of those films, and The Shining as well, which is another Stephen King adaptation, I think about the cold. I think about snow. I think about kind of entrapment, if you will, in all three of those film scenarios. And I think that's what makes this so good. It's the fear of how James Cain, even with his legs broken, even if they weren't broken, he couldn't get away from where he is. And it's pretty genuinely scary. Now, let's talk about... I've already talked about the acting being great. Pretty much everybody's great, even the side characters and their performances, their writing, everything is really great. The actual film's tension building is phenomenal. There's nothing like it. I haven't really seen many films that can build up tension the way this film does. When I say this film is a masterclass and a masterpiece, I mean that. I hope you know that. If you haven't seen Misery, you're missing out. It's fantastic. Even if you're not into movies that are kind of like a little bit more on the drama side than an actual thriller, I promise you there's enough components of everything, including humor, that it'll really get to you. It'll really make it a fun watch for you. You could probably watch this with your kids if it's a TV version and probably have a really good time with it. But it's pretty horrific. I'm not going to lie to you. Let's see. The look of the film is beautiful. I love when we get shots out the window or out in the yard of like the snow and the mountains where they're at. It's beautiful, man. It's beautifully shot as a film. And even though a lot of it just takes place on one single level of the house, that's well done. It's just fantastic. It feels like such an enclosed, entrapped place, even though it's not a small house at all, even though it's not a small yard at all. It just feels like it's kind of a hopeless situation. But the film itself hopes that you'll root for James Cain, and he was a phenomenal actor, man. I love James Cain. He's such a classic actor. And I'm so sad that he passed away this year, man. It kind of broke my heart a little bit when I found out about that, because I love this guy. He's such a great actor. It's like when Ray Liotta passed away this year also. That crushed me, too, because I loved Ray Liotta even more than I loved James Cain. I grew up watching both of these guys all the time. But if you're rooting for Paul Sheldon, which I don't really know how you couldn't when you're watching this, because the performance is great, his humor's great. There are just so many great moments from this film that you can't forget. I don't care if you've seen the film one time or 10 billion times like myself or like my mom, you're going to remember and quote the film for the rest of your life because of how well written it is. Let's see. Special effects. There's really not much of a special effect per se. There is one. It is a practical effect because the film is more of a drama thriller thing, but there is one particular thing that is probably the most ultimately horrific thing I've ever seen in films. One of the top 10 most horrific things I've ever seen in a movie. I'm not going to spoil it for you in case you haven't seen the film, but if you have seen it, you probably know what I'm talking about. That scene is horrifying, and that's clearly a practical effect. And it is unbelievable. It's unbelievable until you see it, and then when you see it, you don't know how to react to it. If somebody explained it to you, you wouldn't know how to react to it. It is just horrifying. Just completely horrifying. One of the best practical effects in movies of all time is what I have to say about that. The music is fantastic. You have some hits that you know of from the history of music. You have classical music in here sometimes. You have so many things that fit this movie so well. And the personality of this film. This is a great example of a cinematic, a piece of cinema You know, this is a film that is not just a thriller, a horror, a drama, whatever you want to call this thing. It has a personality. Think of It's a Wonderful Life. It's not just a film about death. It's not just a film about existence. It's not just a film about God or faith or anything like that, or family, friends, none of that. It's not just about that. It's a film about hope. It is a hopeful movie. It has a personality. There's so many things that shine through, whether it be in the darker moments or the lighter moments, the scarier moments or the more humorous moments in that film. Misery is a personable movie, and that means a lot. It's the kind of thing that it knows what it is. Everybody involved seems to know what they were churning out here, and I think a lot of that originates back to Stephen King's book, which really started that feeling of it, that atmosphere, that tone to it. This film may be an adaptation, but it does it even better, like I said, and really preserves a lot of this awesome little read. This is probably, like I said, one of Stephen King's best books of all time. If you haven't read it, you're missing out on that too. If you want a phenomenal place to start for a Stephen King book or movie as a fan of horror, this is the place to go to. If you've never read any of his stuff, ever seen any of his movies, this is the place to go. I promise you, you will not be let down at all. Anyway, with all that being said, Misery, as you can tell from my opinion, is phenomenal. I love it. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I think it's well shot. I think everything that could be great, not just good, but great about this movie is absolutely 100% great about it. I'm shining a glare in your face, I'm sorry. Everything that could be so perfect about this film is perfect. Everything about it, even down to the camera work, is freaking fantastic, man. I'm gonna tell you one thing. If there's ever been a recommendation from me, from a childhood classic of mine, that's not really it's kind of hard to call it a childhood classic because it's not really something kids should have watched, but I'll tell you this, if you want something that I grew up on that has a little bit of a love for me because of nostalgia and a little bit of, this is just a great damn movie, this is it. This is probably one of the highest recommendations you will ever see on my channel for a movie. And if I had to rate Misery on a 5-star basis, hands down, no questions asked, this little 1990 classic would get a 5 out of 5 stars from me. I could not recommend it enough to you. Now, the other review I'm going to do this week, I might have a different shirt on, I don't know, I have a couple more days until I can get some time to record that. Of course, you'll be seeing this review and that review in the same day, on Friday. The other review will be for Stephen King's The Shining, and then we're going to talk about some other stuff later on. Maybe Storm of the Century, if I can cut some time out next week. This past weekend was a little busy. I was going to watch Storm of the Century. It's a 4-hour-long miniseries. I was going to watch it. We had to bury my wife's grandmother this past weekend, so everything was a little bit crazy all in one go. I didn't really have some time to sit down and spend some time with that or some Christmas movies or anything like that. So, with that being said, we'll see what else we get into at the end of the year with some other Christmas stuff. But anyway, for right now, that is the review for Misery. And the next review after this will be for The Shining, like I said. I love that film too. I'm still not sure if I like this more than The Shining, or if I like Storm of the Century more than both of them. I'm not really sure. But as it goes for movies, this is probably my favorite because of the nostalgia, even though I grew up on The Shining as well for the most part. But still, what do you guys think about Misery? Have you seen this film? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Put all your thoughts and comments down below, folks. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this awesome, awesome classic of a movie. Thank you for watching. God bless you all, and goodbye.